Hello and welcome to Trish TV's The Shift and Lift Mindset Show. We are going to be talking about a documentary that was made by my guest Simon Nasht and some other wonderful people about child trafficking and slavery around the world. And it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. And we are going to take it. And why is it part of the Shift and Lift show? Because we need to shift and lift our thinking on this and be a bit more proactive about protecting not just our own children, but others around the world. So we will be back to meet Simon right after this. The strongest prison bars are in your head. Leaders and teams, it's time for a jailbreak. Simon Nasht, welcome to the show.
Hi there, Trish. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be with you and your audience.
I'm just so great that you actually reached out to me. You sent me a message through my website because you had seen an interview that I'd done with the South by Southwest conference organiser.
Yeah,
that's right. And would you like to tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Well, that conference, which is held in Austin, Texas, once a year, is an important place, not just for films, because there's a film festival that goes with it, but also they have lots of talks around relating to the films, a lot of it about technology, and it's just a kind of groovy conference. I've never been. I look forward to going one day. And I'd noticed that here was this fine young woman in Brisbane had already been talking to the event organizer of that conference. And I thought, that's interesting, and started finding out a bit more about you, Trish, as I saw. And I was really very impressed with the professionalism of what you do. And the message was really interesting too. And of course, your own story, your audience will know your story. But I mean, I was new to it. And I thought, how fantastic is that? Someone that's actually sort of stepped up and said, listen, we can't change the past. We can change our present and how we go into the future. And I thought that was really a really important message. And it relates very much to the film we've worked on, The Children in the Pictures too, because it's really about, the film has to work as a film, and I think it does. It's kind of gripping in some parts, but it also is about what do we do about this issue, the issue of online child sexual exploitation. And it's a massive crime. It's probably the fastest growing major crime in the world. And yet it's not reported that way. It's not understood that way. It's such a sort of shocking crime that we tend to, we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to think about it. But it's gone beyond that now, because it's basically a technology crime. It uses technology to contact the kids, and that means it's changing at the speed of the technology too. And it's now got this kind of like terrible version of it. And we can talk about it a bit more, because I think parents and caregivers will want to know about it, is that, every kid almost in the world, soon almost every kid in the world will have that smart device in their hand. They'll have, they'll have one of these. And that, as the police who investigate these crimes told us, that means that that's opened the front door to every child.
Wow.
From people that want to exploit them. And
just incredible.
Yeah, and we're not understanding the implications of that or the scale of it. Certainly not the scale. And that's what really shocked me when I was first made aware of it.
Right, because we hear about these things, but it's not until we get some statistics and find out a bit about it that you know that you. But we don't want to be overwhelmed, because what I love about what you've done is you've created a documentary that talks about what is being done about it, even though it might feel like a drop in the ocean. And the South by Southwest conference, that interview was with Hugh Forrest, who is very caring towards the topic and is interested in the technology side as well. So I was delighted to be able to introduce the two of you.
Thank you for that.
So Hugh, if you're watching, thank you for being so caring.
That's great. In fact, we've kind of, in a way, I with all due respect to South by Southwest, we kind of leapfrogged. One thing led to another, and we'll be presenting the film at the United Nations in New York next month
Fabulous.
In association with UNICEF, and that will be a big event. It'll be the first time the film is shown in America, and from that we will start rolling it out around the world so that people get to see it. I mean, just to give you a bit of background, the film deals, how do you deal with a subject like this that's so confronting? We made a decision early on that probably the good way into it, the way that audiences could approach it, was through the good people that work in this film. And that is the police, the law enforcement specialists whose job it is to investigate it. And down the road from you, Trish, in Brisbane, is the world's leading centre of law enforcement fighting this crime, the Australian Centre for Countering Child Sexual Exploitation, ACE. And the specialist members that started in the Queensland Police, called Task Force Argos, about 20 years ago, who've really become kind of world leaders in investigating these crimes. They've recruited people from all over the world, because if you're amongst the small bunch of law enforcement specialists that have the courage to take this one, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage, because it is, they confront the reality of this crime every day. They go to Brisbane. They end up coming from, so our film has, Brits, an extraordinary French woman, a great Canadian, an American. They've all moved their lives to Brisbane because this is the thing that motivates them. They want to identify and rescue children who are in grave danger.
I love it.
And
now,
so
what I'd like to, before we get too much into it, we're talking about this film. We have got a 2-minute trailer that I'd love to show. And when you mentioned the United Nations, and I would also like to remind everybody that Seroptimist International, which is the women's group that I belong to a chapter of, they have a seat at the United Nations as well, and do great work with fighting child trafficking. So I have connected you already with Seroptimist International, Simon, but I wanted to flag it here on the video, and I'll keyword it as well. So if you're connected with Seroptimist International, if you're watching, then this is a great connection for you. And if you happen to be a member and going to the United Nations in New York, you'll be able to connect up with those people there too. So what I'd like to do before we go too much further in is, because we're talking about this documentary, people think, what is this documentary? Because it really speaks for itself. It's only 2 minutes, and you will find it. Here is the website where you'll find it. It's childreninthepictures.org. You don't have any spaces. I just put the spaces in to make it easier to read. And I'm going to share the screen and then show the trailer.
So, any requests at all for me to do anything? Okay, is it private now? Anyway, someone liked it. Thank you for the like, whoever liked it.
People cannot grasp what is going on. The case of Girl 1. We're watching a little girl grow up.
It's really horrific, yes.
The abuser certainly seemed to want to shock.
These videos being distributed across the world. It's just a wave that hits you every single day that you come in. At Task Force Argos, we are that thin blue line.
They're going to help regardless of where they're at in the world.
We uncovered a criminal enterprise, a hierarchical structure focused on the sexual exploitation of children.
There was a car.
The bedspread.
Crime scene.
Where are the gaps? The clock is ticking.
He saved a little girl.
Opened a Pandora's box.
This was a case into a sea of other cases.
The sheer amount of content has soared.
And all it did was take us to another haystack full of needles.
It's brutal.
With arrests in Asia, New Zealand.
There's things that will never leave you, ever.
We just can't leave them. Any weapon, any tool that is available, I'm gonna use it.
This is a village issue, a global village issue.
When somebody asks you to bring your skills to the table because children are being abused, there is no such thing as no. Not my world.
It's so powerful. It's just beautifully captures it. And I had to talk to you and interview you about this subject. And if people would like to actually watch the whole film, I'll just open up this second tab, and you will see this one. It's on SBS now.
SBS On Demand, yeah.
SBS On Demand for Australians. And if you're not in Australia, it's coming. It's going to be further out.
Yes, it'll start rolling out around the world from the end of March. There'll be information on the website. Communities will be able to screen the film. Your church organisation or the like, to be able to see it, talk about it, learn more. We arrange Q&A sessions afterwards with experts in the field, these sorts of things. So it's really about getting a kind of grassroots movement. And then we hope to announce a bit later in the year. We're just having the initial chats with them now. One of the big streaming services will, we hope, show the film, and then it will have a global audience.
Oh, that's fabulous. And
not a done deal, though.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
We're getting
now, I want to make sure that I mention there's a few other organisations that are tell us about International Justice Mission.
Yeah, I mean, along with the film, it's not unusual now for documentaries about big complex issues to have it associated with it what we call an impact campaign. And I suppose this goes right back, 15 years or more now, to the Al Gore film, Inconvenient Truth, where the film was one thing, but also it had a purpose. The film was not just to sort of, people go in, look at it, and by the time they get back to the car park, have their key in the door of the car, they've forgotten about the film.
Right.
The aim is to motivate people, a call to action to get involved, and that's a process that's happened now with quite a few documentaries, and they're a good way of getting people to start thinking about important issues. And so associated with the children in the pictures, we have an impact campaign that has some very detailed goals. We can go into those a bit later, but the point is to grow the audience, to grow the impact. We work with lots of different partners. One of the big partners we're working with children in the pictures is International Justice Mission. You can see them there, IJM. And IJM was established in the US good 20 years ago or more now by an interesting group. It was law enforcement officers that were faith-based.
Wow.
So they have mission in the title, of course they do, but by and large, they are people of faith who worked in LEAs, law enforcement agencies, and they are now a large global organisation. They're well established in Australia. Who, $100 million operation that comes from donations and philanthropy, and they train police. They work with justice systems. They work with legislators, and they do a lot of work on kind of trauma triage, working with victims and survivors. And IJM working with us on the film to make sure that it has the largest kind of impact on communities around the world. One, just to make people aware of the crime, because, as I said, it's very badly reported, very poorly reported, little understood. It's still, one of the things we want to change is even the language around the crime, which has traditionally been called child pornography. Now, this idea that it's pornography in that, there's some suggestion there's complicity or agreement in the crime is, of course, ridiculous, because children could never agree to the horrific things that they experience through this crime. It's child sexual exploitation or child sexual abuse. It's, we've got to get people to understand that this is not only a horrific crime, but it's the scale of it is shocking. And you might have noticed in the trailer, one of the things the police at Task Force Argos do is they infiltrate online networks. Now, these are networks that are working by and large in what you call the dark web. That is, you can't Google these sites. You need special software to actually operate inside a sort of secret space. And those networks that are devoted, unfortunately, to one thing, or two things actually. One is the exploitation of children, and the second is avoiding being detected. They're very sophisticated, they're very well organized, and they're also gobsmackingly large. Argos is currently inside a network with more than 3 million members. 3 million.
Wait. Hold on. 3 million members. And I want to point out to people, when we talk about child exploitation, some people think that, they're almost 18, so it's kind of not so bad. But I mean, teenage exploitation is bad. They are underage, but we're not just talking about some pretentious 15-year-old making naughty pictures, which they shouldn't anyway, which that's also bad. But we are actually talking about children. And
we're talking about children in pre-speech age. We're talking about infants. We're talking about babies. We are seeing a range of, this is the sort of crimes that these police are seeing and working with, and working very hard to find the children, because they see the pictures. The funny thing, the unusual thing about this crime type is that every image, both a still image and increasingly video, is a crime scene photograph. But it's a crime scene photograph taken by the perpetrator. And you don't see the perpetrator in the crime, or not their entire bodies, obviously. You see a child being, brutally exploited.
Yeah.
And it's their job to find those children.
Yeah, look. And
where are they?
This is, it is. And for the viewers, we're not going to go into detail about, what's happening in the... But it is important to... It is, what Simon's saying is important, that it is graphic stuff. And that's hard for the police to even cope with. And they need counselling for dealing with that as well. So if you are connected with any kind of organisation that is about saving children from exploitation, whether it be a secular one or a faith-based one, whoever can help, that's great. So we've got International Justice Mission. I'm also aware of a21.org, so that's Christine Kane is involved with that, and there's a number of other people.
Yes, there's the Daniel Morecambe Foundation, there's the Australian Childhood Foundation, there's a whole bunch of organisations who have their own specialties and their own particular knowledge in the field.
That's right. So feel free to, if you are connected with one of those organisations, then you can message me. You can either get in touch, and I'll put you on to Simon. Does not have a wide personal presence on social media. He's too busy getting the job done. So would they get in touch through the
They
website?
can see through the website. There's information there about how people can help and what to do. So through the childrenthepictures.org, there are the links in there about get involved. You'll see that tab up there at the top, Trish.
Yep.
About how you can get involved. Also, I might point out, there may be people watching us who, find this subject very triggering. They may have experienced their own exploitation issues. There is also guidance about where to find some help on that if you haven't reached out and found some assistance. There are organisations that are very, very experienced at dealing with this complex crime. I would say, although in the film we don't go much into the subject of the experience of the survivors, that is, a whole different story. It's a very valid story. All I will make the point is that another aspect of this crime that is very unusual is the crime never ends. What happens is those images, once they're on the internet, once they're up there, they're there forever. And so even as these children move into their adult life, those images of their most degrading experience, their most awful experience, they will continue to circulate, and they will be re-victimized again and again and again. And technically, it's very difficult to remove those images. It can happen. There are ways it can happen, but it's a crime that never, as one of the police said to us, listen, I've worked in homicide. You know the thing about homicide? You're always too late. The victim's dead, but at least their suffering is over. In this crime type, we are dealing with a crime that never goes away for the victim. And that's another unusual aspect of it that makes it very different to many, many other crimes.
Right. Look, what I want to reach out to as well is for someone who might have been a victim, I don't want them to be frightened to because I think people would. They may be afraid to report it because it draws attention, and the fact that they know that it's on the internet possibly forever can make them hesitate to come forward. But
It can
in
be
fact,
overwhelming.
what would you say to people who have been a victim and they don't know what to do about it? Where would they contact Project
I think,
Argos?
as you find on the website in the seek
Great.
help, there are organisations that are very specialised. They will understand your problem. They will
Great.
understand the immensity of what you're dealing with. They understand the shame that you experience. They understand the embarrassment. They understand the fear, and they know what to do, and they can help. The other complication to this crime, of course, is the victims, by definition, are children. Where do they turn? How do they know who to trust? Because, of course, they've lost trust. By and large, the crime is perpetrated by someone they know or their family knows. That's the same as in, just domestic sexual abuse. It's the same thing applies. Because otherwise, who has access to children is someone they know. So it is complicated. There is a kids helpline. There are ways for particularly older kids to be able to seek some assistance on that. It can be done anonymously. They don't have to worry that their parents are going to find out straight away. They don't have to worry that their friends or their schoolmates or their teachers are going to know, because these are the power that the predators have over the children. Of course, is the shame that they will be exposed. They make one mistake, and that leads to a whole escalation of the crime.
That's right. And secrecy is what keeps you trapped. So if this is something that you make it's up to you what you decide to do if you are someone who has been affected. But there is help for you.
Yes, there is.
And there is inspiration, and there are lots of people now who can give a testimony of how they were helped through that.
Yeah,
themselves.
I would say the good news to some extent is that in Australia, at least, where we don't only have the world's best law enforcement dealing with this, we also have some of the best institutional responses to it. Now, that doesn't mean it's gone nearly far enough, but I would say the crime is largely understood by our government and our officials. We have very powerful legislation in regards to this. It's going further with new legislation that's proposed that would make the internet service providers and the platforms that facilitate this crime, the gaming platforms, wherever the internet reaches a child's life, you will find predators there as well. We have legislation that is dealing with that as best it can, and it's not adequate, it's not enough, but we have a lot of resources devoted towards preventing the crime. There's the Office of the Safety Commission, which is unique in the world, as is the Australian Centre for Countering Child Exploitation. The Safety Commission has a huge amount of resources for parents who might be concerned about this. So there is help out there, but you have to know about the problem to begin with if you're a parent or caregiver. And the problem, the issue that we face, and really the reason we made the film, was we've got to talk about this in a mature and grown-up way. We can no longer hide behind the shame of it.
We really do. And you mentioned that there, the government, and there are a number of resources that are getting behind this and supporting. And I would like to give a shout out to Westpac, because you told me a story about Westpac, about how they had made a mistake and paid for it and come back, and they are some of the biggest advocates for helping with the situation.
That impact campaign I talked about has been largely funded initially by a very significant grant from Westpac to allow us to hire staff to work with experts in planning our education materials and the way that we reach out to different organisations to make an impact with the film. That has been largely financed by Westpac. Now, Westpac, a 200-year-old plus bank, the oldest bank in Australia, a huge organisation, 30,000 plus staff. Westpac got caught up in this crime unwittingly back in 2019, where they discovered that they had an online payment system, which was a way of sending small amounts of money overseas without paying large commissions, and all banks were into it. Western Union is a kind of world leader in it, but everybody had their finger in this pie. Westpac realised, and self-reported, by the way, that out of millions of transactions, they had internally identified that about a dozen different single small amounts of money had been paid to pay for live streaming of sex abuse, which is another nasty iteration of the crime, about $50 each, where a customer in Australia would pay to watch live abuse sessions going on in the Philippines, as it turned out. Now, that happened about a dozen different operations. What was the impact for that on Westpac when it was discovered and they reported it to the authorities? Within pretty quick succession, they lost their chief executive, they lost their chairman, they lost, many valued staff who didn't want to work with the bank anymore. It shattered their internal morale. It led to the largest corporate fine in Australian history, $1.4 billion. But more than that, I think ultimately the cost was the reputation to a bank like that. And, the Westpac board of directors had to front up in person to, the annual general meeting of Westpac, which happened soon after this all broke, where, dozens of mom and pop investors who invest in the bank standing furious. What have you done to our bank? What have you allowed to happen on your watch? Now, Westpac obviously had a choice there. They had kind of the, fight or flight response. The flight response would be to keep their heads down, wait for the storm to pass. People have short memories. The press would move on, the circus would move on, and they might come out of it with their skin intact.
And try to defend themselves maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and just say, oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Or they had another approach. They had another approach, which was to lean into the issue and say, okay, we're an important institution in Australia. We touch the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Australians through our customer base, through our suppliers, through our staff. We as a bank need to respond to this crime by doing something positive about it, being an agent for change, because they realize that, frankly, there, but for the grace of God, went they, every other bank, every other technology platform, they're up to their necks in complicity on this because they've been allowed to get away with it to the point because really the public hasn't understood the extent of the crime or the risks of the crime. So Westpac made a decision to support us in the film, and they made that decision in a moment of crisis. It would have been very natural for them, as we were told. Some members of the board, I'm sure, just wanted to sort of make it go away. And others were saying, no, we're tied to this whether we like it or not. We can do very positive things. And so Westpac have supported not just us, but a number of organisations and initiatives, both in Australia and abroad, to actually get positive change around this issue. And that ranges everything from, supporting kids' helplines to supporting the work of International Justice Mission that we already discussed, to a whole range of initiatives, research into the crime. It's poorly researched and understood, and assisting law enforcement and assisting trauma and outreach in that respect. So they've set up a number of and this will be ongoing for years.
Oh, it will.
We're going to become an institution that is a world leader in this, not a world victim of this.
Simon, I love this story. I mean, look, it's a terrible thing to have happened. Let me just preface it with that. Yeah. But when an individual or an institution actually takes ownership of something that has gone wrong in their systems, like they weren't setting out to how can we let people get money through. No one did that intentionally.
No, of course.
But they could have been defensive. They could have done what some institutions do and talk to the lawyers first and have a very carefully worded post on their website that nobody believes, and just
some slogan, a slick ad campaign.
Yep, they could have, but what they did that you rarely see is they took ownership of their mistake. And you used the phrase earlier when we were talking, and I wrote it down. Do we lean back and hope it all goes away, or lean forward and try to make a positive change? And that is the kernel, that's the essence of what this show is about the shift and lift mindset that of resilience and adapting to change and leading, where you might not be that drastic. I went to prison for my poor judgment, and I don't defend that. I take ownership. I caved under pressure. I made a wrong decision and I paid for it. And what I've been able to do is, by owning that, it actually it took away some of the mental anxiety that I had, because I'm like, you know what? This is the consequence. So I don't feel that sense of defensiveness. It's just so refreshing to see an institution do the same thing and pay the price and turn it around. So Westpac, well done you. Good. I admire you and I respect you, because you didn't do the corporate dance of avoidance, and you've done this. And I want to say to people that's I have to give them full credit for that.
Yeah, I think they've taken. I mean, ultimately, I went and argued is that the best response was to take ownership. That was the way that they start rebuilding their reputation. To hope it goes away. One, it's not going to go away. Two, that just makes you look. That's just committing another crime, effectively. And so, but it's easy for me as an outsider to have argued that they're an organisation that were in turmoil, as right to the top.
I know what that feels like.
An excruciating experience for them. But I'd have to say, I agree with you. Full credit to them for helping us, because it's not something they want to be reminded of all the time. But equally, I wonder how many organisations would actually have that response.
Right.
I'll give you one example. And it's in the film, is that as it stands today, one of the majority of reports that go to police about children at risk, when these images are identified, come from Facebook. Facebook has had, to give them credit to this point, a policy of actively looking for this material and reporting it to police when they find it. And then, they help law enforcement. Now, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook has announced that Facebook's instant messaging service, Messenger, will become fully encrypted soon. Now, his argument is people want privacy to be able to talk to one another. The problem with that is, as he admits, there are a few unintended consequences. And one of those consequences is that the reports that are available to police to track down these crimes will disappear overnight. Once that's encrypted, they will lose that source of information. That is devastating to the global police efforts to find these kids and rescue them. And the Attorney Generals of Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, and Canada have written to Facebook saying, do not do this. You are putting so many children at risk. And I might say that risk has just exploded under COVID because of kids being locked up, perpetrators being locked up and living online. It's just, massive increase in the crime time. Now, that's fallen on deaf ears with Facebook. They basically have said, well, too bad. Yeah, there's some, it's a downside of doing that. But, we're being dragged in front of US congressional hearings to say people want privacy. Well, you want privacy? We'll give you privacy. And that's their response, which is indefensible. It is just an outrageous position to do. And worse than that, they cover it by a veneer of saying we're protecting, dissidents in developing countries and, journalists that otherwise would be exposed. Yes, that's true, but there are other ways for that process to take place. It's not actually exposing people to risk, for standing up for human rights and other issues. There are other ways that encrypted conversations can go on. Facebook is just taking, at the moment they employ thousands of people, mostly in developing countries, by and large in the Philippines and India, who spend their life looking at Facebook and deciding whether images are acceptable or not. I mean, they literally employ thousands of people to do that. It costs them a lot of
Yeah.
money. They'd rather just get rid of it. And that is just typical of the responses from some of the technology platforms that are not part of the crime per se, but they are facilitating it by allowing it to take place on their platforms. TikTok is a terrible example. It's just ghastly what goes on in TikTok. They've even monetized it so kids can get, sort of TikTok currency by exposing themselves. Facebook is bad. They're all up to it. Amazon, everybody thinks Amazon's a shopping service. In fact, no, Amazon's biggest business is that they control 60% or thereabouts of the world's server capacity, the cloud, and the storage for the internet. And they have, a lot of this imagery, and it is lots. I mean, we're talking about petabytes of material that is up there now. It's on their servers, and they have an official policy of don't look, don't tell. They don't want to know what's on their servers, because if they look, they will know what's happening. So Amazon refuses to do anything about it. In Australia, the internet service providers drag their feet when police come to them with warrants, by the way, saying there's an IP address there that we've been advised is engaged in criminal activity. We want you to tell us who that is. And they bluff and carry on. They even charge the police for the cost of looking, and then don't even tell them. And that's illegal in many countries. In Australia, it is allowed. They don't have to report. And it drives the cops nuts. It's 2 seconds on a keyboard to advise police who have a criminal warrant investigation to be able to find a child that is being abused and maybe save them from that abuse. These companies do not cooperate because they don't have to, not yet. So part of our aim in the film is to actually make sure that people know that, and I'll name them, there's Telstra is involved in it, iiNet's involved in it, other companies are involved in it. They know it's going on. They don't want to make a fuss about it because they don't want their customers to know about it. But I bet if their chairman of their board was advised that their company is dragging their feet when it comes to cooperating with police on that, I think there'd be some action. But at the moment, they're getting away with it because people don't know that this is going on. And so there's no pressure on these companies to make it what the Safety Commission in Australia calls safety by design. Think of it this way. As John Rouse, the head of Argos, Queenslander of the Year in 2019, says in our film, think of it. If you want to build a council playground, a place where kids are going to congregate, get together, you have to go through health and safety rules. You have to have a whole, range of inbuilt protection from the materials that are used, no sharp edges, soft landing, all these things are highly regulated. But when it comes to the internet and technology platforms, there are no rules. There is no safety procedure built in there. There's no insistence that this place be a safe place for children. They get away with it because they can, and it's gone on far too long. That has to change. I'm not opposed to technology. I've been involved in reporting about technology since I was a reporter back on Beyond 2000 in the 1980s. I sent my first email in 1985, set up my first website in 1992. I've been,
Wow.
I use technology every day. I'm not opposed to it. It's that genie's out of the bottle, right? We're not doing that. But these companies have to take responsibility for what's happening on their services. And at the moment, they do not.
And be seen to be doing it. And it makes me wonder, I think, they make a lot of money out of this. And sometimes I also have to wonder, by the same token, whenever I hear of judges giving a virtually a non-sentence to someone who has committed a sex crime, the thought goes in my head, what's really going on here? What's on your computer at home? Seriously.
Yeah, judges and lawyers and actually police have been caught up in these crimes.
They have. And so if you're going to be a judge, then you've got to be open to judgment yourself. And if you're going to be one of the, if you're a person in authority like you said, if the chairman or whoever was notified that this was going on, they probably know, but maybe they don't.
No.
Then if there's no action, you've got to wonder, is it purely just about the money and about pleasing like people who are into privacy or pressure groups, or is there something, I don't know, is there something more sinister going on at those levels?
I think a lot of it is ignorance, Trish. They think
is?
this is, they hear about, men, and it's 99% men, by the way,
Right.
the criminals.
Yep.
That they hear about them having thousands of images on their computers, and they think it's kids in baths or kids in bikini bottoms at the beach.
Yeah, the bearskin rug with the baby bottom or something like that.
It's not. These are brutal crimes being committed against very young children often, and I don't think the judges understand. But there's another aspect to it, unfortunately, is that we cannot jail our way out of this problem in many ways.
No.
I'll give you an example. 1 in 8 prisoners in UK prisons today, 1 in 8 is a child online sex offender. And that's only the ones who are in jail. They literally do not have room for them. Hundreds of thousands overall are on official reports. They have a letter of warning from the police that you have been found guilty of this crime and that you're engaged in it again. We will jail you next time. They literally do not have room. That's one problem. That's the scale of the problem, and it's no different in Australia. The second thing is, as I said, it's a technology crime, and it shifts with the technology. But we now have a really very worrying aspect of the crime that is no longer a law enforcement issue. It is a social challenge. It is a global health challenge, and that is now we're in the position of older children now online abusing younger children. Is that it's 13 and 14-year-olds who are in contact with a 5, 6, or 7-year-old, and they are sextorting them, as it's called, increasingly violent images demanded from those children because otherwise they will expose them. They threaten, and that is, as the police say to us, we cannot go around jailing 13-year-olds. That's not the answer to that problem. That's a whole education social challenge. We have unleashed through the technology an unplanned social experiment that we have no idea where it's heading. The E-Safety Commission did a report last year that showed that the average age of first exposure for a child in Australia to violent sexual abuse in imagery, in other words, adult pornography that is violent, and it's increasingly violent, is 6 years old. That's the average first introduction. It's either through Big Brother, in the playground. That is where they're first. And of course, the child's brain is not in any way developed cognitively to deal with that kind of imagery. It's just, it's ridiculous to think that they can process that in any kind of normalized way. So it leads to abnormal behavior. Abhorrent sexual behavior, it's called by the experts. And there you are seeing quite young kids exerting power over younger children. And that, once again, because of the ubiquity of the phones in every kid's hands, that is now a massive problem, increasing problem that is not a law enforcement issue. That is a social challenge that we are not addressing because we're not owning up to it. We're not admitting it's an issue, and we're not building in the safeguards into the technology platforms to try and prevent it. And so, what staggered me when my colleague on the filmmaker, Akim Dev, came to see me. Dev, at the time had a 4 or 5 year old daughter, and he had stumbled across the first glimpses of what were happening in the dark web about this. And he came to me and said, "Simon, you have no idea what's going on." I said, "Well, like everybody, I had no idea." You've got to grasp the scale of it. Massive. This is a kind of Me Too scale social issue that is virtually unreported.
Wow.
It is of that scale. And as John Rouse, the detective inspector who heads Argos, said, if I told you, as he says to me, that every day I was seeing thousands of images of adult women being brutally raped, and these images were being uploaded and circulated amongst large criminal networks on the internet, there would be a global outcry. But because it's children, we hide away from the reality of it. And of course, that's a natural human reaction. Nobody wants to know about this stuff. You don't,
Well,
believe me, you
right.
don't want to know what's going on.
And in fact, really, there are women being brutally violated, and there isn't an outcry.
No,
so
of
I
course.
would probably disagree with him and say, look, there is an outcry, and
No.
It's like.
I mean, the point he's making is not a relative one about violence against women, and we know that's a huge problem. We understand that. The point he's making is that there is no discussion.
We don't want to talk about it, and one of the problems is, as you've pointed out, with young teens, and like my parents are pastors, and they've had to go through training for church safety.
Sure.
And they said there are different categories, different names for offenders, and they said the biggest risk, they knew then, this is before we knew all this stuff, but the biggest risk to a 5-year-old is a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
You know, it's those young teens, and they are vulnerable themselves because it can ruin their lives, and they need intervention and help. And that's what I love about when churches get involved and they have healthy youth groups. They've got healthy things that teenagers can go to occupy themselves, so they're not stuck at home. I know we've had the lockdown, but guiding your children into activities that expand their world and teach them to have compassion and empathy and put themselves in someone else's shoes. So much of social media is about me and mine and my truth and how I feel. There's very little about what our obligations to others and to put ourselves in their shoes. And when it's on a screen, it doesn't look real. You know, it depersonalizes and objectifies people. Simon, I'm so grateful for you sharing what you have and being able to promote this movie, this documentary. And once again, it is childreninthepictures.org that you can go to. You can watch it on SBS On Demand in Australia, and it'll be available further on if you are connected with a group that is interested in fighting this problem. And I want to say, you know, there is hope. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is hope, and it starts here. And
there are good people too. There are good people too. I mean, it's a lot of bad people in this film, but you know, there's this remarkable group of very dedicated police, and they are really good. I mean, it was one of, I won't forget the time when we were in at Argos, Dev and I, my colleague, and we were just kind of like came out. I remember being in the lift, totally crestfallen, just sort of like slumped by what we'd just been learning, what we'd just been talking about, and, you know, just feeling desperate about how can we do anything about the scale of this? And one of the cops said to us, he was taking us down to the front door, he said, remember, Dev, remember, Simon, we're the good guys collectively. You know, there is good in the world, and we need to remember that, because otherwise we would just get desperate and give up. And there's tremendous things that can be done. We just need a few calibrations, particularly amongst the technology platforms, even in their terms and conditions. You know, those T's and C's they're called. You know, it just needs, you know, an agreement in there from the technologies companies saying, you know, you can opt out if you don't want to do it, make it voluntary. If law enforcement has reasonable grounds for suspicion that this account is associated with child sexual exploitation, you give law enforcement the right to investigate. Basically, something along those lines. Yes, no. And if you're going to say no, well, but 99% of people are going to go, sure, I want to be, you know, I want to allow those crimes to be investigated. I don't want to stand in the way of that. And that alone would make a huge difference.
Well, it would. I mean, they're very quick now to anything that might be false references to COVID. They're very quick to jump on that this might not be true. Or if it's you know, politically like motivated, and you know that's topical. So they'll do what's topical. But hey, how about we do something?
They'll only do what they're forced to do by and large. But my argument to them, and we do hope to address quite soon some of the major tech companies is that do it because that's what a good organisation should do. Do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect your bottom line. And frankly, if you want to look what happened to Westpac, you might want to do it to protect your bottom line, because I tell you what, if this breaks on you, and sooner or later it will be devastating for your business. So do it out of self-interest. You don't even have to be a good corporate citizen, which wouldn't be bad. Do it out of self-interest, and you'll feel good about it, and your customers will feel good about it, and your suppliers will feel good about it, and your staff will feel good about it. Where is the downside of cooperating in this respect?
Yeah,
I don't
that's
see a
exactly right. I don't either. Simon Nasht, it has just been enlightening, and I'm privileged to have you on here in my little studio, knowing that you are a producer and a director, and yet you're a man with a heart, that you're not just out there just doing business. You've taken on something, and you've said, I can do something, I can do this, and I'm getting goosebumps that you are one of the
Trish, thank you very much
achieving heroes.
I'm thrilled to be able to talk about it. As you see, I can talk about it. That's not a problem. But it does take getting the message out. It does take committed people that think, okay, this is important and we can do something about it, because otherwise nothing's going to happen, right? That's how it changes. So I would, urge people that knew nothing about this, as I didn't a few years ago, knew nothing about it. Go to the website, look at the ways you can get involved. Reach out to us if your organisation or your church or your club wants to, do something positive about this to help us get the message out, and we'll respond, and we look forward to that. And I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it, Trish, because it's not an easy subject, right?
No, it is, and I thank you that you saw my platform as a good vehicle for you to be able to share that message, that it has enough credibility that it will showcase it well. So I appreciate that.
More power to you. Thanks, Trish. I really appreciate it. I better get going, but
and we're going to finish up. So thanks so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll see you all next time.